Alright, CNT120. This podcast is for our Chapter 2 lab. Now, we're going to do this in 4 big pieces, if you will. Chapter 4 is all about addressing and how computers are communicating, finding each other on a network. And the 4 big things we're looking at are MAC addresses. That'll be the podcast we're doing now. We'll come back and look at port numbers in another podcast. We'll come back in another one and look at IP addressing, IP4 and IP6. And then the last one, we'll look at domain names. So those are the 4 big things we're looking at. So in this first one, let's look at our network card and our MAC address. All right. So let's start on, I have my lab up here. I have my virtual machine up and running. I'm just going to minimize that for now. Let's start with our Windows side. And we want to look at our network card and our MAC address. So to look at our PC information on our Windows PC, if I right-click on the Windows icon and pick System, this is going to tell me a little bit about my actual PC that I'm using. It tells me a little bit about the operating system, a little bit about the processor, RAM, those sorts of things. So this is kind of a quick overview of the system. Well, what we want to do is we want to dig a little bit further, and we want to dig into the actual hardware pieces of my unit. So what I will do now is I'll right-click on my Windows icon and go to my device manager, because I want to learn a little bit more about the devices that are in here, mainly my network adapter right here. So I'm going to open up the network adapters, and I'll see I have a couple here. The first ones are pretty easy to see. They're Bluetooth adapters. We kind of know what they're about. We see that there's a couple Intel NICs. We have an onboard wireless. We have the onboard Ethernet. And then in this particular lab, there's a second NIC in here, a gigabit, that's being used for another class. But this is the main one we're using, the Intel NIC. And then I see some VMware stuff, some virtual machine stuff out here for the virtual machines that are on this system. But this is the main NIC we're looking at. If I open this guy and take a look, these are all the options for this NIC, and the first thing I see is this device is working properly. In other words, this hardware has been installed, the drivers have been installed, and it's communicating, that hardware is communicating the operating system, so therefore I can pass data through this NIC and onto the network. This NIC is functioning. So that would be a quick check on a kind of the physical level, if you will, of whether this NIC is installed and operating. Well, let's go a little further, and let's start looking at some of the details about this NIC. So I'm now going to look at the network connection settings, if you will. I'll come down here, and we'll right-click on this guy. This is one way to get to our network and sharing center. That's one way to get there. The other way is what I tell you in the lab. If I right-click on my Windows icon and go to network connections, this is another way to get there. There's more than one way to do this. This tells me that I'm connected to the internet and I'm working. Yay. Okay. If I find my Ethernet NIC right here, this guy here, I should be able to open up. We'll do it this way. That's not the best way. Let's go to Internet Settings here. And I'll go to my Ethernet. There's my Network 3. This tells me a little bit about this. The IP address, DNS servers, manufacturer, there's the NIC. Here's my MAC address. So this shows me that I do have connection. It is on. I have IP addresses. I have a MAC address. And that is functioning. That is one way to get to it. Another way to get to this, I can go to the same kind of information, open network and sharing, find my Ethernet 3 NIC, open that up, and I'm getting the same kind of information here. I'm connected, I have IP address, I have internet connectivity, and I'm passing and receiving data, if you will. Alright, I'll close that for now. We also want to look at what is this, what are the settings on this. So if I open up my command prompt, and I do an ipconfig. Well, ipconfig is just going to show me the IP address of my system. Here's my Ethernet 3 NIC, this Intel NIC that we were dealing with. There's the IP address subnet mask default gateway. But it does not show me my layer 2 MAC address. Well, to do that, if I do an ipconfig /all here, it's going to show me all the parameters of my NIC. When I do that, I'll scroll back up here. I got to find my Ethernet 3 again. Here's my Ethernet 3. There he is. This is the NIC I'm dealing with. Here is my Intel Ethernet connection like I saw in the device manager. There's the MAC address of my system, 1866DA, blah, blah, blah. Down here is the IP address. Here is also things about DNS servers and when I obtain the lease from DHCP and when it's going to expire. So it's telling me all my information about it. The big thing I'm looking for at this point is my MAC address. That's the piece we're looking at here. So there's how I could find my MAC address. Now, while we're here, what we're going to do is I'm going to open up a notepad file. So if I click on my Windows icon and type in notepad, I'm going to open this guy up and I'm going to start this for my saving stuff for my lab. I'm going to come in here and I want to copy mainly the IP config part, my Ethernet 3 part here. So I'll copy this right here. That's the main part I need. If I hit the enter key, that'll copy it and I can come over here and paste it into my notepad file. And what I'll do is I'll do a file save as. And for me, I'm going to put it in my documents folder because I have a folder in here called 120 Brown. And I'm going to call this my Chapter 2 Lab Windows file. And any of these Windows results that I'm getting, I'm going to save in this notepad file. So there is looking at my NIC and my MAC address on my Windows machine. So I'm going to close these two, and I'm going to repeat the same thing on my Linux VM. So I'm going to slide this over here. I'll open my Linux VM. Okay, and I'm going to repeat the same basic process. I'll scroll back here. Let's look at the system information that we're dealing with here. So we'll do menu, we'll do preferences. We're going to scroll down here to system info, and this will tell us a little bit about this machine and the fact that it's running Linux Mint 18. Here's the kernel version, here's our processor, memory, hard drive, blah. Okay, so there's a little bit about this system, just like looking at the Windows machine and find out it's running Windows 10. If I do a back here, this is almost like my control panel, just a little tip on that one. I'll close that out. What I want to look at now is the networking on this guy. So we'll go to menu, preferences, because again, we're trying to get into the NIC and the network settings. So we'll go to preferences. We're going to go down here to network. And in here, it brings up my network connection. It's showing it's wired, it's connected a gigabit or 1,000 meg. There's the IP address. There's the MAC address. So I'm actually getting all of this, and I'm seeing that I have an IP from the college, a 172 in this case. So I know it's up and functioning and running. So that would be a quick check to know that it's kind of up and running, if you will. And actually, the next step down here, we're looking at the MAC address. Here it is right here. I don't really need to go any further. There is my MAC address. I'm also going to, just like I did on Windows, let's verify this through a command prompt. So I'll open my command prompt here. I have a little terminal prompt down here. And if I do an ifconfig, this is going to show me here is my IP address for the machine. And here is my MAC address. Now the MAC address actually shows right off the bat in this ifconfig. There's the MAC address of my machine, the 000C29, etc. Now, when we looked at the network settings a little bit ago, we went through menu, preferences, network, and so forth. Okay, let me show you a shortcut. If I come down here and right-click on this guy, left-click, and do network settings, I'm going to get to the same thing and see there's my 000C, 000C. There is my MAC address. I'm seeing it both places now. Just a little tip on that one. That's a little shortcut to get to my network settings. And this right here is what we're looking at to see that I have an IP address. There is my MAC address, and it is my NIC is in and functioning. That's what we're really after at this point. So I'm going to open a notepad file here. So I'm going to go to menu. I'll go to accessories. In here there should be a text editor of some sort. I will open up my text editor. So over here I will copy this stuff. I can highlight it. I can do edit copy. Come over here, right click paste, and there is my network settings and mainly my hardware address for my Linux machine. And this one I will do a file save as. I will put on documents, but it's going to be documents on my Linux VM, so I will need to deal with that later, but I'm going to get it there for now. And I'll call this guy Chapter 2 Linux Lab, or actually Chapter 2 Lab Linux kind of thing. And I'll save that here. It'll be here for later. And I'm going to add to that as the lab goes on. So there real quickly is looking at both my Windows network card and its setting, mainly the MAC address. And here is looking at my Linux network card and its setting, mainly the MAC address. We'll come back in the next one and start looking at our next type of address of port numbers.